You're muted. There you are.
I do that at least one every 4 episodes. So this was that, one out of
I'm
four.
lucky. I'm lucky.
Uh, uh, I don't do this and I get yelled at by my friends. So please make sure you click the like and subscribe button if you're interested in the video. Apparently, I don't push my own content enough. So uh,
Yeah.
definitely appreciate anybody who does that. Um, Welcome, Derek. How's it going, buddy?
It's going good. Going okay. You know what I mean? Or just another day, and just had my 14th year anniversary yesterday, and yeah, hanging out with you.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I was found it fascinating because like when I first like met you online, I saw one channel, and then I see this completely different channel.
Hmm.
Um, I like both, but what kind of made you decide to do two different channels or to do one channel for um, your atheism and then one for recovery?
Well, first thing I want to say is the other channel wasn't for atheism. If you go back and watch my earliest videos, it was actually just me trying to understand the Bible like better, not the same thing that the spin doctors at your church want you to. They sell you what they were told. They don't really. They're not critical, right? So there were things that I had gone to multiple different churches over the years and realized, okay, this and this church teach totally different things. In fact, no wonder they have a different denomination. They say they're not closer to the truth. We're closer based on our understanding. So that's the reason I started MythVision. But I had also found out that there were mythologies that were comparative to these religions, and then also found that like the Bible itself is utilizing things that are from other mythologies, even if it isn't copy and paste. It's sometimes a polemic against these other religions, but it's using them, like the Mesopotamian ones in Genesis. So going to the recovery, I didn't have MythVision. I was a struggling addict. I mean, I was religious man, for many years, up and down with addictions to pills and alcohol, and then pills turned into heroin down the road toward the end. I was injecting it. So I was completely stuck. I thought there was no escaping this. And I was withdrawing on my couch when I was watching YouTube videos of a guy who was suffering, but he was like, he was smoking some weed on the back balcony, hanging out, talking about, I'm going to try and make it through this. And I was relating to this guy so much going through withdrawals. So then I said, well, why don't I at least tell people where I'm at? And I opened my camera while sitting on the couch and just started talking. It's like, look, this is my life. This is what I've been doing. I'm going to do it. I'm pepping myself, patting myself, going, you can do it. You can do it. And I did it. So one of those videos that I did day 5 has almost 1 million views. And the other one, it's like 1,500,000 views with me on day 7. I look like a 50-year-old Justin Bieber with like gold yellow teeth, from just not brushing my teeth, on heroin, really, really messed up. And I just used that channel to literally communicate where I was at, what I was doing to stay clean. And if you watch those videos early, you'll see God is active in my life. Now, what that meant, I had a 12-step type of mentality, God of my own understanding. I had taken it away from Christianity, so to speak, but I still had a vague supernatural higher power concept. And I think all the studying that I've continued to do while in the new channel that I started, trying to explore these ideas that we weren't supposed to touch, they were no-nos. As I started exploring them and researching them and being as honest as I possibly could, I realized, okay, what makes this the magical one and all the others not? To me, it became very arrogant for me to assume I had the correct one. Everyone else was wrong. And that was, the exclusivity of Christianity, that Jesus was the one. And so I gradually deconstructed over a long period of time. And now I label myself an atheist because I have no belief in a God. Could there be one? Sure. But I now automatically register all of these emotions that I experience. I equate those emotions and experiences to just the human experience. I mean, sure, I could break them down and say, okay, look, serotonin an epinephrine or whatever the chemical balance, the chemical term is, that's in the midbrain or the brain stem that's releasing these chemicals, give us experiences. Like, for example, I'm drinking a cup of coffee this morning. It gives me a nice little caffeine buzz and I enjoy it. It makes me feel, a little bit of happy and joy and whatnot to get my day going. You could break it down to that, but we don't experience it like that. We experience it like it's more. So I started going, is there a natural explanation, if you will, for these things? And as I started probing that, I realized, why am I saying God? So that's why I now realized, okay, I'm like doubting Thomas now. I'm not closed off. How could I? I mean, can you imagine if Jesus actually appeared to me, right? And said, hey, I am he. And he proved it to me. He could, if that was true. But I'm not, I've turned into doubting Thomas, meaning in order for me to believe this, he knows what he has to do to prove it to me. And I say the same thing. I know a Muslim who would watch this would go, he's not going to prove that because he wasn't crucified, or he didn't die, so therefore he didn't rise again. Or you get another religious person with a different angle. So I started to be critical on my own traditions that I once held sacred, not to a point where I'm hateful, not to a point where I can't communicate with people who believe in those things anymore. That would be hypocritical. The same way me as a drug addict who has almost 6 years clean off drugs communicates with drug addicts. Like, I'm not closing off the world because I no longer struggle with the addiction. And I did see myself addicted to religion as well. So hope that wraps up like a big summary of, my experiences and why I had both channels.
No, that makes sense, because one thing you and I talked about is that when somebody's in the midst of heavy addiction, whatever that may be, drugs, alcohol, other hard substances, the last thing I do, even as a Christian, is I never push God on that person. I want to find out what is the coping mechanism that they can use, and how can I help them with that to get them off of that. I think sometimes people are so predatory when it comes to somebody who's struggling, and they want to push their ideology or their belief, or even in some cases lack of belief on people. But like I've found from going in and out of the jail, sorry, cats by me, that it's just being there for somebody. It's seeing what they need. It's asking them what they're feeling, and then building from that.
Absolutely. I mean, I see it pushed all the time because, well, what is our human tendency to do? If we're trying to help people, what worked for us, we think will work for everyone else. And I've realized that it's not one size fits all. Each person's at their own point in their own journey of this life that we have. And there's some things they were raised to believe and think that they can't in their own brain. They just cannot. There's either cognitive dissonance, or there's biases, or there's something there that prevents them from being able to be where you're at in your thinking. And that doesn't make them dumber. That doesn't make them worse than you. That just means that what worked for you may not work for them. So for me, my mom's a Christian. My granny died last night. She was suffering from multiple things going on. She was suffering. And, the family they text, God bless, keep praying for granny. And I just say, yes, I'm definitely keeping her in our thoughts and things like that. I don't even try to pretend like I'm going to say to them, well, why your prayers aren't doing it. Like, that would be, I mean, honestly, that makes me want to throw up, that, that you can't recognize that this is really a way of mourning and a way of like trying to connect. So they mean well. Christians mean well. So do a lot of atheists, I think. The problem is there's such a chasm. The Christians want you to come to our side. Atheists want you to come to their side. And that interfaith dialogue isn't there. There's too much at stake, Christians feel. And atheists feel like they're trying to make them become a Christian, and they don't think that they have sufficient reasons to believe in the faith, or that Jesus didn't rise. So I'm all for just helping people where they're at, which is why you'll never see me go on to the Rewired Addiction channel, Derek Lambert channel on YouTube, and talk about MythVision and how God doesn't exist, or how I think he doesn't exist, or anything. I don't do that. Some people need to believe in things greater than themselves. Even if it was fictitious, Let me give you an example. In wars in antiquity, there are written literature where, you'd have generals or leaders of these troops who would hype them up, either say the gods have said, or in some way give them the motive of saying, we're going to win. I know we're going to win this omen or the prophecy or whatever it might be. We're going to win this. Don't lose faith. It gave the soldiers something they didn't already have, even if it weren't true. And so sometimes people need that lift me ups. There's a psychological advantage to having it. If you believe you can do something, usually it increases the chance that you can if you don't think you can do it. That's the thing. It's a psychological thing. So, yeah, I hope I didn't steer you off the course any there.
No, that's good, because if what I believe as a Christian is the truth, then it should be able to stand on its own without being pushed, without being forced. Rationality is something that we should all seek to. And like you said, the only way we're going to do that is by having friendly, respectful conversations. And you and I are both in a group. I'll plug his channel, Normalizing Atheism.
Yeah.
And one thing I appreciate about this guy is that he's like, hey, in order to normalize atheism, we need to normalize how we talk to Christians. Like, it can't always be a hard interaction. And he and I were talking about something Penn Jillette said, which was, if a Christian's not telling you about hell, and I'm not saying Christians, don't take this as every conversation has to be a belief in hell, because that's ridiculous.
Right.
But if you're a Christian, the atheist already knows you believe in hell. It's just, I'm trying to think the best way to bring this home and word it simply. Okay. So Penn Jillette said is that if you believe that a bus is coming at somebody, you would want them to move out of the way of the bus.
Yep.
So if a Christian's telling you or talking to you about their belief in hell, it's not like we're trying to be critical. We're not trying to be nasty. But then I also look at another thing. If you're looking at it from the atheist perspective and you believe that the Christian has a false belief, you were potentially in that same boat as well.
I think the thing for me, as a once fundamentalist evangelical Christian who knows how intense the doctrine of hell really is, and has a good grasp on seeing how psychologically terrifying it is. It has holds, for example, when I've had talks with my mom in the past where mom was like, tell me more about what you think now. Right. And I used the Homeric epic story to talk about Odysseus and explain how he was the king, his wife Penelope, and he had to go to battle in Troy. And I gave this whole story, right? Another story from the Greek world to kind of get her to see. By the time I was done telling the story about Odysseus and he came back and don't tell them it's me, he looked like a beggar and all this stuff. My mom was actually crying because she's the husband of a soldier. My father's a retired Green Beret in the Special Forces. And, he's kind of a king to us. He was a Billy Badass, growing up. He taught us self-defense. He taught us how to think, how to fight with our thinking, not just be a raged, guy and stuff. And so my mom started crying at the end and she's like, wow, that was such a beautiful story. And I said, yeah, that's the story the Greeks saw, whereas Christians see the Jesus story. And there's various worldviews that have different stories. Being one who was a Christian and sees how it has a hold, my mom always starts to cry when I talk about it. She goes, yeah, but I don't want you to go to hell. And I thought to myself, okay, I know she means well. And I know every Christian means well. Most, I'm not gonna say every, I've heard some pretty hateful stuff too.
Well, there's some that I would concede I don't think mean very well. And it's, it comes off, instead of telling you that I believe there is a place where bad people go when they die, it comes off as more like some of these Christians are telling you to go to hell. Yeah. I don't think that's appropriate either.
Yeah. This is the thing. I think atheists are, one of the things that they get frustrated, I'd say, maybe they lose their patience is it's like you believe in a place you have no evidence for. You go on faith about this. Okay. You're looking at a book that's teaching you this. And Now, some people go, well, I've experienced, I saw something, I saw a demon or whatever it might be. I've had experiences too when I took drugs. But, you know, I now have explanations for them that don't require me to run to the supernatural to explain them. I now realize that we humans have imaginations and there's a lot of chemicals in the brain, and also ingesting chemicals can really cause you to see and experience certain things. So, just like the light at the end of the tunnel, that's always heaven to a Christian. But if you realize the science behind it, when you start to go unconscious, the last thing, well, the thing that starts to shut down first is your eyes, and the light at the end of the tunnel is your actual vision is starting to tunnel out where there's a distance of light, because if you close your eyes and you touch your eyes, you're actually causing, I just did an interview with a guy about the brain, you're causing light. And you could be in a pitch black room, no light in the room, and you touch your eyes and push, you'll see light, because your eyes are actually getting that. There's science behind this. And I'm saying to myself, okay, I know why the atheists are impatient, because they're going, you believe in a hell I'm going to cook in by your loving God, you know, the way they phrase it.
Mhm.
This is like, and because I don't believe in Jesus. Now, some Christians might go, well, if you're a good person, usually you might look to some Catholics or something that might say that, but usually evangelicals, usually I say, will say, if you don't believe in Jesus, there's a narrow path, few find it, and that's the only way. That's the harmful ideology that atheists are trying to say, is like, look, we understand evangelicals are trying to be faithful to the text. They really are trying to be honest about the Bible. That's one thing you can commend them for. However, we're trying to show, and the way I'm looking at it now, is how dated this is, and why we need to start to find ways to use the good, get rid of the bad, and move forward. That's what atheists, I feel like, are trying to do, but they get so caught up in this war and battle to be right and argue with Christians. That's my input, if you will.
No, I think it's good. I think that in the same way we're talking about each other being honest with our positions, the Christian should be open that, hey, the atheist does not believe this. They're not convinced that the evidence that we're presenting is good enough to reach that particular conclusion. They also believe talking about hell is a very traumatic thing. So these conversations just need to be open, like you said, to where you can tell me that you're like, hey, you don't believe it's good to tell somebody about hell. And then I can tell you from my vantage point why it may even be a topic that comes up. But that's how we push these conversations forward.
Yeah. I mean, like, if someone wanted to talk about hell, I don't get traumatic from it. I'm just telling you, because I know how intense the doctrine is. I understand how detrimental it is if you don't believe, according to the Christian worldview. So, like, Christians mean well. They think they really believe this, which is why they're trying to convince you to ask the Lord and to believe. What I started doing, though, is started recognizing, okay, where else is this doctrine of hell? It's not really in the Old Testament. It finds itself poking its head up in the New, mainly. You see Sheol, the grave, but it doesn't talk about hell, a burning lake, fire, this kind of stuff in the Old Testament. What you find, though, is Zoroastrianism. So you can go and see in Persian Zoroastrianism, they taught there's the bridge of lie, if I'm not mistaken, as Dr. Price talks about it, a very thin edge bridge. The righteous will walk, or everybody will walk. And if you fall, I can't remember how this works, but ultimately, if you land in the lava at the bottom, if you're righteous, it'll be like a warm bath of milk. It's not going to burn you. But if you're unrighteous or you're wicked, it'll burn you and kill you or destroy you, and you'll suffer for life. Buddhism also has versions of hell. Even Dr. Price was saying they have more versions of hell than Christians do. And they have this doctrine of this kind of suffering. So the question then becomes, well, who's in charge of it? Just depends on which story you read. And when you look at all these stories, I would love to see the Christians, not just start with I'm right to prove you wrong, but go, okay, this is weird. Why are there similar teachings in different worldviews? Does that mean that this means mine is true? Or what if all cultures are kind of pointing to a similar theme? Is this just a dated concept for which the ancient world used and understood things for why maybe righteous people didn't get what they deserved? They deserved better. And the unrighteous, wicked people who were ruling over people doing bad their whole life never got punished. They gotta reap what they sow. So somehow we've got to let these guys, start realizing, hey, you need to do good here now, or else you're going to go to a place where you're going to really reap what you. And it also gives justification for the people who've been suffering, like Job, for example, like someone who's suffering their whole life, who looks at this guy who's sitting in his palace getting pampered, and he's a bad person according to what we would say morally good is. Are they going to ever get punished for that? Well, yeah, of course. Our God's just. He's going to make sure it happens. And the different worldviews have different ideas about the punishment. But that's what happens. It's always some concept like that. And so when you do that, it humanizes these things. What makes the Christian, explanation for hell true, and Zoroastrian or the Buddhist or whatever not true? I want that kind of thinking to start traveling through the mind, because that's what helped me free me from such a strict, limited, narrow concept and saying Christianity was the only one and it was true. And I had to wrap my head around this. I used to say, oh, no, they must have borrowed from Christianity. The Buddhists must have taken that from the Bible, or vice versa, Zoroastrianism, whatever the myth might be. Oh, they borrowed from the Bible. But what if it was the other way around? What if the Bible authors are using concepts borrowing from other cultures? How true would the doctrine of hell be then? And let's say the Jews borrowed, Second Temple Judaism borrowed hell from Zoroastrianism. So when you know this stuff, you go, look, there's some things you don't know about hell that you might want to research. You're pushing this on your mom, your sister, your brother, your cousins, your friends down the street. You're telling them that your loving God will potentially cook them one day forever. They do it to themselves, depending on which Christian you ask, but you will suffer at the hands of a righteous, holy God because you didn't accept the one and only Jesus Christ into your heart as Lord and Savior. I think that's what we're trying to paint a picture, is to say, try to see it this way, but you know how it is. Faith is a powerful tool, and how can you break someone out of it? I think they have to see it themselves or be willing to see it like that,
Yeah. And correlation doesn't always equal causation.
True.
As far as like Zoroastrianism and Christianity, like it's possible for two people to either develop the same ideas but be separated and never make connection. For example, if you come up with an idea and you go to the patent office, you may put in the patent, and somebody may have beat you to that by a year. And you guys are separated by oceans.
The only problem with that, James, is Persia actually conquered the Jews. So assuming that this is correlation doesn't cause causation, it would be interesting if like China or someone like totally irrelevant that did not mix cultures, did not conquer Judea, were to come up with this exact same concept and go, oh, wow. Simultaneously on planet Earth, people were just coming up with similar ideas. And that's possible because, I mean, look, you can look at the ground and you can see volcanic, there might have been lava holes and whatnot. People see fire coming out of the ground. Well, hell must be down there. And that's where God will send you if you're bad. That could be a common theme. For me, I think there's more causation after studying scholars like John J. Collins and listening to Dr. Price and other people who research this stuff. That's why I really dig into it, because they're like, no, the Persians actually were over the Jews. And in fact, if you look at the kings that come to bring the gifts to Jesus, they're magi. They're Persian magi's. So it's like, where is this coming from? It's when you start to look at this stuff, you start to go, okay, this isn't
an interesting theory on the three wise men, where Daniel was from the book of Daniel, how he was kind of separated from majority of the Jewish people. There's a thought that the three wise men actually came from Daniel's lineage.
It could. You talking about like Babylon?
I don't want to misspeak because I've only heard the concept a few weeks ago.
Right.
But it was kind of just a neat thing to flesh out that they were magi from the east. They knew certain signs to look for. And also too, for anybody watching, some of the people we mentioned, Dr. Price, he's all over YouTube. Check out his stuff. If you're a Christian watching, don't be afraid to look into any of these concepts, because if what we believe is actually true, then it can withstand scrutiny. It can withstand testing. If an atheist brings you like a challenge and they say, "Hey, I don't believe this is accurate. It's in the Bible," open up the Bible, search it out, and look it up, because if it's real and what we believe is true, it should be able to withstand that.
You know, I always said this as a young kid. I prayed and I said, God, if I ever go away, you know, bring me back, right? And then I also prayed for wisdom because I really wanted to understand. I interview scholars that are Christians still, right? They're not
Mhm.
your typical evangelicals, though. These are people who see problems that are in the text. They see contradictions. They recognize humanity playing a huge role in this biblical narrative. They still believe in Jesus and Christianity, but not in this strict. A typical evangelical would call them liberal Christians, and they go, "Oh, they're not real serious Christians." And that's a sad thing, because it's not just the atheists and theists need to talk. I think Christians need to maybe consider, why are these scholars that end up in these academic, you know, serious people that are in top places like Duke University, Chapel Hill, you name it, why are they also recognizing flaws and things like that? And they still say they're Christian. They're just liberal. They've been indoctrinated. If you interview them, you'll see how intelligent and how much understanding they do have of these texts. And I feel that, to me, I respect that they're trying to be accurate instead of saying, you know, the Bible says, and I can't let my paradigm of a perfect, inerrant, infallible Protestant view of the Bible, I cannot let that go, therefore. And I think it's interesting to check that out, because the last thing I'd say is I caught myself filming years ago. I had my phone and I was in the truck and I was filming, and I was such an intense Christian. I said, if the Bible said Jonah swallowed a whale, I would believe it, because the word of God said it. Now, think about how crazy that is, right? It's not even humanly possible that a human could swallow a giant fish or anything like that. It makes sense that a fish, maybe in some sense, would, and I'm not saying that I believe this is actually true. I do think this is a story, and it carries impact. It carries depth. It has serious meaning. I don't devalue that. But the idea that a big fish swallowed him and he went to the depths of the sea for 3 days and 3 nights, and he cries out in chapter 2 in Jonah, like, Sheol has consumed me, et cetera, but God restores him. You know, why, as a crazy fundamentalist that I was thinking, would I even think that a human could swallow fish? Because if the Bible said so, it didn't matter what it was. If the Bible said so, if donkeys can speak, if snakes can talk, if humans can be made from ribs, if entire, you know, rivers can be separated, you know, the list can go on. If all of these things can happen here, then if the Bible said that Jonah could swallow a giant fish and not vice versa, I would believe it, I said. Now, I thought about that and I kind of cringed at it years later, listening to myself go, what made me think that way? And it's the whole going to the church, listening to them preach, and the way we're taught to view the Bible, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it comes down to where we as a Christian want to make professions of faith, to where if somebody asks us a ridiculous question, like if the Bible said that God could create pink unicorns that fly from Mars back and forth to Earth, would you believe it? And I think sometimes the Christian wants to just say, absolutely, yes. Then
Right.
pink unicorns would fly. And so I agree with you on that. Like, there should be things that we should be critical on. There's texts like the end of Mark, which we don't have an earlier manuscript from. It's like Mark 11 through 16. There's some other passages that we don't have in the earliest manuscripts. Now, one thing I appreciate from majority of the Bibles you'll get is they actually tell you this in the margins. Like,
Yeah.
there is in the book of Revelation the number 666, which I'm not trying to get into that at all, but there's an earlier manuscript that has the number 616.
Right. It's Nero Kaiser. It's Nero Caesar.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that, to me, is pretty like
Mhm.
that's obvious to me. And as a Christian, before I found that out, of course, I was trying to pin the tail on the donkey. And what I mean is, you know, you can play in the game, you got the blindfold, you don't really see what's going on, but you're trying to find everyone's like, oh, that's the donkey. Yeah, he didn't put it on the tail, or the tail, he didn't put it on the donkey's tail area. We would do that with presidents. We would do that with like UN. Oh, there's a new world order. Like we kept applying this 666 beast. It's a mark of it's a man. It's the number of a man. It must be one of these men in our current context, and not really go back and realize, hold on, this is talking about a man, 67, right up to the destruction of the temple, Nero, who was persecuting, according to the revelator of John, if you will. He's persecuting people. He's a horrible man. You know, if we read the polemics against him, whether they're true or not, from his enemies, the guy killed his mother. Like, there's all sorts of stuff to really look at Nero and say, this guy was a wicked dude. But yeah, like, I think you're hitting something there is, and Mark, you were talking about Mark 16, actually, the chapter 16, there's the cutoff in the last part. It ends and the women were afraid. The women were afraid. That was the end of Mark. And it's like, well, what happens? I mean, that was a climatic, like out of nowhere stops. And so scholars have various theories on this, trying to understand it. And I entertain all of them just to see what might happen, what's going on. But of course, Matthew gives you the whole, like, look, you got the empty tomb. You've got him coming out of the tomb, the whole nine, and he appears to many, all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah.
Yep. And it should be like Mark 11 through.
Is it chapter 16, 11
20?
through?
Yeah, Mark 16, 11 through 20, because it stops, like you said, abruptly, right where it says, and the women were afraid and they left and they told no one. Now,
right.
I will say this, though. Sometimes I think that there's really good points that the atheist can bring up to be critical of the Bible. But then I hear this one that goes around. I don't know if you've heard this before. But they'll be like, okay, because it says they went and they told no one. And I'm like, well, hold on, just think that through. Like, if they told no one, like literally told no one, then why is it recorded here? Like, even in the author's narrative, like they had to have eventually told someone.
Well, so this is the thing. So if I'm going to try and explain that as somebody who is critical, right? These are authors. These are authors of books. This is how scholars that I talk with discuss this. These aren't like absolute, oh, let me do an autobiography and explain exactly what was said. From our standpoint, we see this as a literary device. This book, it's a book written, an actual published authored book. And when you look at stuff like Jesus is in the garden and he prays, all the disciples fall asleep. Now, who was there recording him saying his prayer and his private conversation? Who watched? Like, how did the author know, right, that he's over here and the disciple, everybody's asleep. Nobody's in the garden with Jesus praying. He's by himself and he's having this conversation. How did the author know Jesus is over here going, not my will, God, but thine be done, you know, take this cup from me, etc., the whole thing. Then he comes back and he goes, you can't even stay awake for 1 hour, and they're all asleep. How did he know that? So there's two options. Christians will say, well, the Holy Spirit had to have told them later, or Jesus at some point, because right after that in the narrative, Jesus is captured. He doesn't have time to say, hey, by the way, this is what I said 5 minutes ago. So in 30 years or 20 years from now, make sure you write this down. He gets crucified. So either he rises from the dead and then says, hey, let me tell you guys what you need to write down. Or the Holy Spirit somehow is informing these authors. But what's most plausible to me and other atheists and people who are reading this, even scholars who aren't atheists, that are Christians, that are scholars, they say this is a literary. The author took it upon himself to put these words into his mouth. And if you look at the synoptic gospels critically, the way that these scholars are doing it, they're not identical accounts. So how did Mark get a different take than Matthew, or how did Luke get a different take than Matthew and Mark? And you might go, well, if you were to do an eyewitness thing, and I've heard Christians talk about this view, brought in 3 witnesses. If they all have the exact same story, then you know that it's all contrived. But there's enough similarities between Matthew and Mark to know and have very good reason to say there's too much in common for Matthew not to have known Mark, or vice versa, if you want to argue Matthew in priority. And this just starts to make it more human to us. It's like if Matthew's using Mark and Luke is saying, I'm writing, oh, dear Theophilus, he's writing to some big name, obviously, and Luke's very high in his Koine Greek. He's a well-educated guy. He's writing to somebody. To me, he's making a more accurate, true account. This is the gospel I'm writing to you. It's going to be like the best one. This is the best one. To me, and this is just being able to say this, I wouldn't have said this as a Christian.
No, you're good.
This is a better gospel than Matthew, Mark, or any other gospels that have been written so far. Mine is more accurate and true, Luke's trying to say, in my opinion. So when we use it and go, oh, all of these are equal, I see Luke saying, no, mine, Theophilus, mine's the most true account that I'm writing to you. It's the most accurate. We also have Papias. Eusebius writes about an early church father named Papias in 90-something AD, who says Matthew was mistranslated. There are two versions of Matthew that were mistranslated, and Mark has its chronology wrong. So you go, okay, there's already flaws even by the early church father standards.
Have you heard the name Marcion?
Yes.
Okay. So Luke has potentially a lot of influence by Marcion. So there's certain things that Marcion, for example, certain doctrines, certain beliefs that Marcion had that could have influenced some of the manuscripts that we have for Luke, for example. So when you're looking at maybe what might be, if you were going to be critical, Matthew might be the better of the gospel as far as reading it that way. Biblically speaking, I like to go back to the original text as much as I can. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate your thoughts on that too. We are getting to the 37-minute mark. I told you I'd only keep you 30 minutes, but this conversation has been really fun.
Thank you. Before we leave and close out, would you like to plug your channel, tell people what you've got going on and where they can find you? Sure. If you're interested and your curiosity is going to kill the cat, so to speak, and you're interested in like checking out what I do, MythVision podcast on YouTube is where I do all my interviews. Mainly it's scholars, people with expertise in particular fields, and not everybody's an atheist. You know what I mean? But I just love everybody. I want to learn this stuff. I don't want to create offense to anybody. That's not my goal. My goal is to actually try and educate and find out what the truth is. And I think anyone who is on a path of trying to figure out what is accurate should honor that. Even if they disagree with my conclusions, they should honor that I'm actually trying with my limited human capabilities here, trying to get my head wrapped around it. And with that being said, if you're struggling with addiction to drugs or alcohol or anything, any substance, I have a pretty motivational channel called Derek Lambert on YouTube where I was withdrawing off heroin, and I was also very addicted to alcohol for many years, and I made it out, and it can be done. So I'm almost 6 years clean. So that's all I'd like to say, man. No, that sounds good. We kind of went in some different avenues than what I thought this would go into. Right. So I definitely want to have you back on at some point. I like the energy and the enthusiasm you have. I like the friendly nature of the back and forth. So if you're a Christian, Muslim, one of my regulars who watches this later, take a look at his videos. If you're struggling with addiction, I've checked out a lot of these. He's not preaching atheism. He's not saying repent and accept the spaghetti monster. It's nothing like that. He's giving you like, especially if you go earlier on, he's giving you like how he's feeling, how he's processing through the day. And maybe you can relate to those as well. Thanks, James. Appreciate it. All right, guys, I'm going to hit the outro. I'll say this one more time. If you like this content, like and subscribe. If you don't like it, thumbs down and unsubscribe, I guess. All right, guys. Thanks.